of the problem that one sort of addresses. Research is also about the question of power and who can be bought and who can't. So what we often see is we see corporations, we see the Pentagon in the United States, we see non-governmental sources coming into the university, and with the enormous funds that they have, they don't not only buy space, they buy consciences. And they drive research in a way that is actually antithetical to the notion of community and justice, that is antithetical to the notion of democracy. Research, for instance, that is aimed at creating more sophisticated, technologically computer-driven weapons, ray guns, forms of surveillance that now can be organized around the construction of what looks like flies. New ways to watch people and utterly control them. So I think that the question of research, while it often has a kind of neutral sounding ring to it, really is central and is at the heart of how we want to view the educational project. Because it seems to me that research doesn't come first in this discussion of education. The project comes first. What's the purpose and meaning of education? And that's what should drive research. And if the purpose and meaning of education is essentially to expand the possibilities for human agency, human possibilities, and democracy, then there's no place in the university for corporate money that, in a sense, is being used to undermine the environment. I mean, there's no place in the university for the kind of money that really is investing in death and profits rather than in human life. So for me, the question of research has always taken on a very political and ethical overtone. I mean, critical inquiry has to, in a sense, take seriously its possibilities for translation, for linking the private to the public, or as Zygmunt Bauman has said endlessly in his work, for allowing us to understand how private considerations are basically linked to public issues, and how public issues bear an impact on individual issues. I mean, this is an absolutely crucial issue, it seems to me, at a time when the social is under attack everywhere. There's a small story about cultural capital that I think you would really enjoy. Part of your life as a working class kid, I think, is often organized around confronting problems once you step outside of the luxury of your neighborhood that you can't imagine exist. A world where the symbols, the gestures, the rituals, the disciplines are entirely foreign to you. And there was a period in my life when I was involved with a very ruling class woman. I actually married her, but we got divorced. And it was not meant to be. And I went to a house, and her mother descended from the staircase, and in some kind of gown. Her father was the chair of the English department of Brown University. And we sat around, and she said, the thing that we usually do here at dinner is we all begin by talking about our favorite novelist. And I thought, oh no, oh my God. I couldn't believe this was happening to me, that they were actually going to come to me and ask me to begin to explicate, I was reading Jack Kerouac, I think, But I left that house that night thinking, I have to learn this language, I mean, that this language is punishing. It has a punishing quality to it. You have to learn the elaborated code. And I remember I went home to my third floor apartment in the East Side, and I was reading One-Dimensional Man. And I stayed up all night. And I read every line. And I remember, I've got to learn how to talk like this. I've got to learn this language, And it was kind of a turning point for me, because I really have two languages, right? You really have the elaborated code and you have the restricted code. And people often say, oh, it's just amazing how you talk, this kind of silliness. And yet for me, nothing amazing about it at all. I mean, it's actually about the outgrowth of a kind of struggle in which if you don't become multiply literate, you can't survive. Particularly when you're on the receiving end of a kind of discourse that punishes you if you don't know it. Right? I mean, so you really have to learn, very important, to understand the registers of human interaction as they're interfaced with matters of race, class, gender. You know, I mean, this is not, as some Marxists would say, a purely surface issue. You know, that this is phenomena. That's nonsense. This is really about the stuff of agency. It's about the stuff of connection. You know, it's about the stuff of understanding. It's about being in the dialogue somehow. And if not, being able to stop a dialogue, particularly when that dialogue borders on terrorism. You know, Bourdieu was right about questions of distinction, about questions of symbolic violence. Symbolic violence can be as deadly as material violence. You know, the way people can destroy you by humiliating you, you know, that isn't the right pronunciation. Don't you know your history? I mean, you know, this kind of stuff. We've all sort of experienced this. But this is a political issue around questions of language. And for me, that was crucial. And the Frankfurt School educated me. No question. I mean, in Theory and Resistance, the first chapter I wrote was the application of Frankfurt theory to educational theory. That was my first chapter in the book. It took me an entire year to do the research for that, to read as a working class kid, totally untrained in philosophy, to be able to master that, you know, to just go through it, learn how to research it, learn, you know, particular research methods, which, as Maya will tell you, I've mastered. I mean, in terms of my own capacities, you know. And so it's very important, you know. So I mean, I think that when we talk about research and when we talk about language, all of these things are situated within social/biographical formations. So I don't believe that these questions exist externally in ways in which we can separate them from the places we've come from, or from the institutions that have official legitimations about what counts and what doesn't. I mean, endless numbers of people have been fired in universities because they're not positivist, right? Because they don't believe in the end the questions of mathematical regularity are really what matter in education. And I've just never believed that. I'm more inclined to talk about the mix of modernity, modern and, you know, let me put this differently. I'm probably more inclined to go with somebody like Bauman. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to avoid in a very clumsy way here is I'm trying to avoid a kind of periodization that would suggest a break, as much as I'm trying to complicate the social formations in which we now find ourselves. To suggest that there's no difference between what was imperialism, for instance, in the 1940s and the conditions that produced it, and the way in which global capital works now, I think is absolutely wrong. Conditions have changed. The key is to mark those conditions. Personally, I'm indebted more to Raymond Williams than I am to most people around this issue. I mean, I think there are elements of the culture that are residual. I think there are elements of the culture that are traditional. And I think there are elements of the culture that are emergent. And I think it behooves us to mark in a complicated way both the relationships between those elements and how they configure something that we need to address that produces new problems. So rather than simply go to the postmodern, the question for me is, what is it about the global political sphere that needs to be marked, that is distinctive and unlike anything we have seen before, that therefore demands a new politics and a new language for that politics? And so that would be the entry that I would go in. Now, I would take. Now, at the same time, I think that Zygmunt is very right in pointing to the collapse of the social state, what he calls liquid modernity, this massive sense of insecurity and indeterminacy that has now come to mark all aspects of social life, which in itself is a political analysis. I mean, he's talking about the collapse of the social state. He's talking about the rise of neoliberalism. So for me, I would like to say something like we live in a neoliberal age, you know, that the age is marked by the rise of new modes of fundamentalism. So I would rather provide characteristics of that age and talk about how they relate to the past, rather than provide these categories that are so neat and so clean and so uncomplex and so generalized that in the end they really don't tell us very much.